Welcome to No Longer Conformed. I'm Erik Garthe, and we are studying spiritual excellence, a study of practical discipleship. In this session, we'll be looking at 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 13 to 19. Excellence stands tall in testing. If your child is not taught how to stand alone when surrounded by those who put him or her to the test, they won't be able to stand tall. Judges chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. Now these are the nations which the Lord left, that he might test Israel by them. That is, all who had not known any of the wars in Canaan. This was only so that the generations of the children of Israel might be taught to know war, at least those who had not formerly known it, namely 5 lords of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites who dwelt in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal, Hermon, to the entrance of Hamath. Now, look at verse 4. And they were left that he might test Israel by them, to know whether they would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he had commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. Would God do that? The Israelites were about to dwell in the land of promise. Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Joseph, 400 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness, 5.5 years to conquer the land. Theory was about to become reality. How did they feel? Well, first, they were alone and uncertain. Judges chapter 1, verse 3 again. So Judah said to his brother, to Simeon his brother, "Come with me to my allotted territory, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I will likewise go with you to your allotted territory." And Simeon went with him. Their leaders were gone. Moses was dead. Joshua was dead. Where do we go from here? To whom do we turn now? Second, they were inexperienced and vulnerable. Judges chapter 2, verse 10. When all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. Those people had not seen God's hand personally. They didn't know God. They hadn't experienced his work. They had no awareness of the cost of their freedom. And then third, they were surrounded and outnumbered. Judges chapter 3 and verse 5. Thus the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. That's a lot of ites. God's people were surrounded by the heathens who weren't about to give up their territory, much like the world we live in today. That's how they felt. How did they respond to their circumstances? Well, you've got to go back and read God's instructions in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. When the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them. How did they respond? Well, they responded with a lack of total obedience. Judges chapter 1, verses 19 to 21. So the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland, because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said. Then he expelled them from there, the three sons of Anak. But the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. So the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. And then verses 27 to 32. However, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites were determined to dwell in that land. And it came to pass when Israel was strong that they put the Canaanites under tribute, but did not completely drive them out. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer. So the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. Nor did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Nahalal. So the Canaanites dwelt among them and were put under tribute. Nor did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Alab, Akzib, Helba, Aphek, or Rehob. So the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Look at verse 33. Hebrews and Canaanites together. Nor did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh or the inhabitants of Beth Anath, but they dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath were put under tribute to them. And then second, they responded with a loss of spiritual distinction. Judges chapter 2, verses 10 through 12. When all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord, nor the work which he had done for Israel. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were all around them, and they bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. Compromise. And third, they responded with a looseness of marriage unions. Judges 3, verses 6 and 7. And they took their daughters to be their wives and gave their daughters to their sons, and they served their gods. So the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and Asherahs. Drifting morally affects every part of your life. See how easy it is to move away from commitments? Look at 1 Peter, our text, chapter 1, verse 13 down to verse 19. Pay attention to this first verse. Therefore, verse 13, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not conforming yourself to the former lusts, as in ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. And if you call on the Father, who without partiality judges according to each one's work, conduct yourself throughout the time of your stay here in fear, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. 3 suggestions for standing tall in testing. Standing tall begins with the way you think, renewing your mind. Satan's goal is to destroy faith and take you to a lower standard. Standing tall calls for strong discipline. Look at that verse 13 again. Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Your will is at issue here. Standing tall limits your choice of personal friends. What appears harmless can prove dangerous. That's what happened to the Israelites. It takes courage to change your thinking. It takes courage to build strong discipline. It takes courage to avoid undesirable friendships. But you can't soar with the eagles unless you do. You think about all that, and you have a great day.